Hey, my name's Nick. I design and program games, web apps, other stuff like that. And I have one goal today, which is just to answer this question, what is an interface? Or more accurately, what is one though, like metaphysically? So, what are they? Let's start with some definitions. The more common definition would be this technical one, which is just a device or program enabling a user to communicate with a computer, whatever. That's too limiting, it's too dry for games, because games are really about enabling this incredible range of human input and emotional stimulus. So I think we need something a little bit bigger, something like this one. It's a point where two systems, subjects, or organizations meet and interact. That's all it is. It's just an intersection, it's a meeting point, it's a place where communication can take place. So why should we talk about them? Well, because it's one of those things that we think we know from being alive for at least a few years, but most of us haven't looked at them with fresh eyes in quite a long time. We've been recognizing, reading, and interacting with interfaces from the moment we're born. We begin crying out for our caregiver, we play with the mobile above our crib, we learn to eat with utensils, we get the whole here comes the airplane routine down eventually. And into childhood, adolescence, and adulthood and beyond, we learn to play more roles that are expected of us. So for example, how does a student interface with the school? How does a job applicant interface with a potential employer? How does a driver interface with the DMV without absolutely losing their mind? So we're all already experts in different kinds of interfaces, and we really have to be in order to survive in this society. But once you think you know something, typically you stop studying it, or you stop studying it the same way. You fall into old patterns of thought that you know are tried and true, you lose your curiosity a bit, and you start to see working with that concept as just, well, regular work. So, case in point, as game likers and game makers, what comes to mind when you hear the word interface? Is it the heads-up display, the ammo, life meter, currency, minimap, all that stuff? Or is it the menu system? Is it your inventory, your character stats, your quest log, the save load system? Is it the contextual button prompts in this very old game, Conker's Bad Fur Day, the ones that tell you to take cover, mantle over obstacles, get into your car, hop on your horse, gather the herbs, and all the other things you can do just by pushing the same button in a different situation? I mean, these are all examples of interfaces because they're the meeting point between two systems or subjects. But you're both a system and a subject, right? Like humans are large, they contain multitudes, whatever. So the conclusion I've kind of come to after thinking about this for a while and working in software and game design for the last decade or so is pretty much this, which is that by adopting and internalizing the broadest understanding of what interfaces are, we can identify and design more intuitive, playful, and satisfying ways for people to engage with games. So, here are some invaluable terms for thinking about interface design, all of which I borrowed wholesale from Donald Norman's The Design of Everyday Things. It's that book up there. It's really good. You can get it from the library or maybe get yourself a copy. It holds up pretty well. The first term I want to talk about is mapping. This is when a user engages with a system. And when they do that, can they clearly connect the possible inputs to the possible outputs without any ambiguity or crossing of wires? So, for example, when you're using a stove for the first time, does the pattern of the knobs match the pattern of the actual burners? Some stoves are awesome and have literally a 2x2 grid of knobs to match the 2x2 grid of burners, but I don't have a stove that good. Another good example in the gaming space is those analog triggers that controllers have had for the last decade or two. In many shooters, for example, you imagine pulling the trigger on the controller mimics the pull of a trigger on a gun, and that's at least a natural mapping in our minds. Another example here would be maybe you shake the controller to shake off head crabs or brain slugs or whatever your game has. Affordances, another term to use. These are fundamental properties of a thing that determine how that thing can be used. So a good example here, I think, is the Wii remote. It's got this weird contoured shape, and it can only really be held in two different ways. One like a TV remote or sideways like an NES controller. But both of those make sense depending on the context, and they're both familiar to different types of users. Conceptual models are another term to think about here. So by presenting a clear, comprehensive, and accurate way to internalize how a system works, users can then interact with it more confidently and better estimate how their actions influence the end result. So some simple conceptual models might be like a bicycle. You can see the pedals moving the gears. Ballpoint pen, you click it and the thing goes in or out. A Dance Dance Revolution dance pad. It's got arrows, so does the game. Vague and unclear models, however, are things like HVAC controls. How the hell does a furnace work? I don't quite understand how setting a temperature actually affects the airflow. Should I set it higher? Should I set it lower? The answer is just set the temperature you want, but this is something that people get confused by. Constraints, another term. So these are ways that we limit the range of input through physical, semantic, or situational, cultural, and logical constraints. So the goal here is that by using constraints well, a user with imperfect knowledge of what they're doing can still perform an action perfectly. A good example here to think about is the shift from like manual transmission as the norm in cars to automatic. You might lose a little bit of control, you might lose some fuel efficiency if you're really good at shifting, but at least a far more perfect usage, fewer people stalling out, that kind of stuff. And then in terms of user behavior, terms to be aware of are things like blame. So how many times have you tried to, like, I don't know, open a door or set a thermostat and mess it up completely and embarrassed yourself and you never lived it down and you're talking about it on stage right now? It's okay, it happens. If the thing was designed better, if the interface was designed better for that door or that thermostat, you never would have messed up in the first place. And repeated engagement with bad design can induce helplessness, which is bad. It's kind of just like, how do you get out of that? We can also learn a lot from slips and mistakes. These are similar but different things. A slip is when you have the right idea about what you're doing, but something goes wrong along the way. So an example here is like, let's say you're prepping for a raid boss fight or something, or an RPG last boss, and you're re-equipping characters, and you forget to put your equipment back on one of your characters, and so you wipe because they were weak and terrible. A mistake, on the other hand, is when you have the wrong intention behind solving a problem. So an example here would be you're grinding for XP in this RPG because you want to unlock talent points, but XP only gets you stat boosts, and so your talent tree is woefully useless, and the game didn't tell you how to do that, and you're sad and you uninstall it. So it's on us as designers to anticipate and prevent slips and mistakes wherever reasonable, but we can learn a lot from them when they happen. Then there's also this notion of structuring tasks. So let's say I want to do something that requires several steps. Do I end up commonly mixing things up there? Do I leave something out sometimes? If so, the structure of that operation could probably be improved in a way to make it clearer how to get from point A to point B. And of course, good interface design should be accessible. It should account for a diverse range of ability, and it should be inclusive as opposed to exclusive. When we design interfaces with accessibility prioritized, everybody ends up winning. We get clearer interfaces, we get more opportunities to capture and process key information, and we also eliminate common points of frustration, which ends up resulting in a cleaner and more direct connection between the user and the system, which means people are happier. It's great, and the game is better. So let's bring it back to games for a moment. Within a game, what is an interface and what is not? Well, it's kind of everything. Like if you really think about it. Your environments, your menus, your control schemes, your loading screens, your asynchronous multiplayer messaging, whatevers, all of that can be viewed through this lens of the interface, of the meeting point between the player and the game. Game interfaces are already pretty diverse and creative, ranging from excellent to so terrible they can cause literal physical and emotional harm. So let's take a look at some examples and start with maybe a bad one, just get it out of the way. Red Dead Redemption 2 is an exquisitely beautiful game. It's got excellent character development. I really, really like this game. It also happens to include a menu and HUD system that is so Byzantine and so convoluted that it almost seems designed specifically to hurt you. So let's say I want to do some bad stuff and put on my bandit mask. Okay, cool. Press L1. Except you can only do that in 2 missions. Everywhere else in the game, you gotta hold L1, press R1, point the right stick toward the bottom right of the wheel, and release L1 while still holding the right stick in that direction. Did you get it right? Did you hit R1 in accident? Did you use the wrong stick? I did this wrong for probably 50 hours, and then I beat the game, and I was like, wow, I was terrible at committing crimes. So, like, what about this interface would have told me how to do things differently? Like, what about this radial menu indicates which stick to use? What tells me that R1 changes tabs necessarily? What tells me there are tabs here? there aren't a whole lot of clues about how to use this thing correctly. And don't even ask me how to change ammo, because I don't know if I just know at this point. There's a lot to critique about Red Dead's radar interface. It lacks clear affordances. It prevents the development of clear conceptual models, and it throws reasonable constraints to the wind. Like, what in the world is a horse core? And why would anyone hear those two words together and say, oh, yep, got it. Okay, enough of that. Let's look at some examples of good interface design. So the funny thing about Red Dead is it actually has a lot of really good interface design too. One example is Arthur's journal, the main character's journal. It's not just a log of what you've done, but it has a different perspective on events. It's written in longhand, it has illustrations, and what it serves as is a vital window into and interface with Arthur's character. And I found that more than anything in the game, more than the cutscenes, more than the missions, this really influenced how I thought about how to roleplay Arthur throughout the game. Or just take the environment of this game, this living, breathing countryside. Animals are hunted, people work the land, they drive carriages. A scary cloud pattern in the distance tells you a storm is going to roll in and have tangible consequences for how you take your next actions. It's going to limit your hunting options. It's going to make things more treacherous. So we can easily come up with a model for how the environment works in Red Dead because it affords us the same behaviors and patterns as our own environment. It responds the way we expect to the inputs we provide. So not only is this like pleasant and immersive, it empowers us also to solve problems in creative and thoughtful ways. Another great example, I think, is Papers, Please. It's a game where you work as a border crossing agent in a turbulent nation. It is dystopian as heck and very good. You review documents from travelers and attempt to only let those in with valid clearance and detain those who aren't allowed. So Papers, Please paints a stark portrait of the dehumanizing brutality of profiling and blindly carrying out orders. It does this through its clever interface. It uses this multi-panel system depicting the state of the queue, the person you're talking to, and the documents arrayed on your desk. All the while, you're pressured to act quickly to prevent terrorists from attacking the country and to keep your head down so your family stays fed. So the interface is designed to feel both authentic and also stress-inducing. It's a vital part of the theme and experience of this game. There's also Journey's singing system, which is one button, but you can use it to perform long and short tones, and that serves not just as a puzzle-solving mechanic, but also as the sole means of communication with other players, which becomes really the emotional foundation of this game. Eliza is a great example. This is a game that uses cell phones and AR goggles as interfaces, which are largely familiar to people. Like almost everyone's used a cell phone. And so this draws upon these clever frameworks that we know commonly, but it also uses this in a smart way where it subverts them by introducing, for example, invasions of privacy as game mechanics and invoking this sort of dread I think we all kind of have about our data being violated and us not knowing it. In The Witness, all you do is draw lines and look at things, and it somehow manages to explore that simple single model and affordance in such significant depth that the player is given these increasingly profound experiences. What if the lines are everywhere? Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, splits the controller in half, each stick and trigger corresponding to one brother or the other. So the game teaches you through this interface to internalize this theme of two independent, different people who overcome their differences and succeed together. And in fact, the game's emotional climax hinges on this mechanic. My favorite recent example, though, has to be Death Stranding. There are a lot of really cool interfaces in Death Stranding, like Sam's private room, where you can look around and do, like normal stuff, necessary stuff. There's also, aside from that, a rich language of player-generated communication through these signs. So for example, there's this beautiful waterfall about halfway through the game that I never would have found if a player hadn't marked it with this indicator saying, oh, this is beautiful, go check it out. So I got there, I checked it out, I gave it a like using the game's like interface, which I won't delve into because it's very Kojima, but it's very cool too because it's a way to send positive feedback directly to both actual human players and NPCs, and everything in the game hinges on likes. My favorite interface in the game, though, has to be BB. BB is a baby in a jar, and it cries when it's startled or scared, like when you take a tumble or you're being attacked, but he also laughs and giggles when you do cool stuff like pop a wheelie on your motorcycle or double jump down a ramp and do dangerous, fun things. And all of this feedback comes through the controller speaker. And when you soothe BB, when BB is upset, you do that by actually rocking the controller up and down gently, slowly, like you're rocking a baby. And it is the weirdest thing to do with people watching you, but it actually makes the whole experience and the controller itself feel less arbitrary. It actually becomes symbolic of this precious cargo you're carrying, and your relationship with BB as a player becomes much more meaningful along with the main characters, as goofy as it may feel. So there are just so many ways to interface with players. You have motion tracking, light up control colors, you have force feedback, environmental design, diegetic and non-diegetic text and interactables. There's, I don't know, Kentucky Route Zero has a phone number you can call. It's really weird. So like what do I want you to take away from this? Because this is just a lot of stuff. So first, I hope you walk away with a curiosity for rediscovering the breadth of potential interfaces in front of you. There's a lot of potential there. Second, I hope that you consider how you can apply design terminology and user behavior to develop intuitive, accessible, and redundant interfaces for your games. And finally, I hope you give yourself permission to start to notice the ways you interface with the world and each other in your daily lives. Like, learn to be curious about interaction. Look at it like it's a brand new concept. Because when we give ourselves permission to look at things like they're brand new again, our creative spirits are energized, and we begin to see exciting and fun new potential in what previously just seemed mundane. I can't possibly teach you everything I know in 15 minutes, but these are 4 books I recommend heartily. I mentioned The Design of Everyday Things. Understanding Comics is a great book on what it says, but also just on thinking about visual communication. Art of Game Design is kind of just a Bible on game design in all its aspects, including interfaces. And then this book here, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, is kind of a foundational text in data visualization that I find also applies heavily to when we think about, especially like working with numbers and conveying numeric data to players. All right, that's it. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? I have time for one question.
Do you have any advice on messaging for accessibility options? Ways to offer accessibility options without sounding condescending?
Good question. The question is how to offer accessibility options without sounding condescending. So are you thinking like of how Celeste did this or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually haven't had to think about this before, but I think the best way to do it is to, I guess the way I would look at it is like when you're designing your game, try to always anticipate what sort of accessibility challenges you may run into by introducing a mechanic or a control system or things like that. And then ask yourself, like, you know, if you were to offer an alternative or a shortcut or some other like ease of access option for that or variable access option, how might that kind of affect things, and how would you try and explain that to people? Because I think, you know, the goal is for everybody, I think, to be able to enjoy and engaging with a game. And the question is just how do you kind of navigate that, that difference as you try to create different avenues for experiencing it. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's how I would at least try and process that a bit. Cool. All right, thank you so much.